Drink, Michelik. Rudy, a red-nosed and bald miner, offers his flask to Michelik. Life is only hard when you don't have a drink. Rudy laughs at his own wittiness, and his laughter soon turns into a rough cough. Hadzic, such a pale and rough-looking miner it seems he has never seen the light of day, nods in agreement. Michelik has never been much for drinking, not in merriment nor in sorrow, but then he has never experienced this kind of heart-wrenching grief before. His calloused hand reaches for the flask. He nods to Rudy and takes a swig. The vodka brings tears to his eyes and a raw burning down his throat. He takes another swig before Rudy motions for him to give back the flask. Michelik runs his fingers through his dusty dark hair and closes his eyes for a second. He sees Elena dancing in a field of wildflowers, her long braids coming loose. He doesn't know if it's a memory or a fantasy, but it doesn't matter, as long as he can still see her in his mind. He fears the day when he will no longer remember her soothing voice, or her green-blue eyes that would change color depending on her mood. It's been almost a year since a fire which left thousands of residents of Krakow without a roof over their heads and shattered hundreds of families. The pain that weighs down on Michelik is still as raw as back then. That devastating night last July, Michelik hadn't been home to save his family, nor to suffer with them. In the spring, Michelik had once again been hired as a farmhand outside the town, and he wasn't going to return to Krakow until the harvest was done. He had left his family to fend for themselves on that hellish night. Had his wife and children woken up by the fire, feeling the flames scorch their skin? Or had they drifted off to death in their sleep, the suffocating smoke relieving them from a last moment of terror? These dark, useless, self-punishing thoughts torment Michelik. Will the drink help with the grief, or only make the darkness darker? Michelik is now alone. What he's living for, he isn't sure. In the thick, dusty darkness of the mine, Michelik scoffs at himself. This isn't living. This is nothing more than surviving. He works and spends his sleepless nights in the workers' barracks, praying to a god he has lost faith in long ago, to sanction him one night's rest. Maybe he doesn't deserve a respite from his guilt. Perhaps this is his punishment for being away that night. When word reached Michelik about the fire, he immediately left the farm, knowing they wouldn't let him come back. For a few months, his search for work, together with other men made homeless by the fire, one more desperate than the other. With the expansion of the Wieliczka Salt Mine, many of the men from Krakow applied for work at the mine. It was a relief when he left the familiar streets of Krakow behind him. Vainly he thought that by leaving Krakow, he would no longer be haunted by his memories nor his never-ending guilt. Michelik remembers when he first got rejected from the mine, it felt like a punch in the guts. How much lower could a man fall? Not knowing what to do, he stayed around the Wieliczka town, and by what Rudy would later call fate, Michelik had stumbled upon the news that a man had gone missing in the mine and hadn't been found. Michelik rushed to the foreman, knowing they would be looking for a replacement. The same day, he found himself crammed in a cart, together with other miners, being lowered down the shaft to start the construction of level 5 of the mine. Michelik is abruptly brought back from his thoughts when Rudy taps him on the shoulder, motioning for him that it's time to head back up. Their shift is done. With a filthy rag, Michelik wipes his forehead and joins the other miners in the line. They start to head back through the dark tunnels, their backs bent in the cramped space. The mine is nearly 300 meters deep, and it extends almost 200 kilometers through narrow passages and chambers. A place it would be easy to get lost in. The thought makes Michelik's skin crawl, and he holds tighter to the coarse rope, his lifeline to the other miners. When they reach the first set of heavy wooden doors intended to keep the airflow going in the right direction, Michalik suddenly feels like someone is behind him. He peers into the darkness, holding his torch high. Did they leave someone behind? Michalik Krupa, the foreman's voice thunders through the tunnel. Close the door behind you, get a move on. I thought I saw... Michalik stops himself, unsure what he actually did see. The exhausted and dirty faces of the miners are peering back at him. Quickly, Michalik counts them. They are all there. He closes the door with a louder bang than intended, and the foreman swears under his breath while opening the next door. Hadzic laughs at him, trying to rile up Rudy. You better not be giving him any more of your magic drink, Rudy. The Mjeke can't handle it. Rudy gives Michalik a peculiar look before following the others. That night, Michalik, in his short, restless sleep, dreams of her. Elena. Laughingly, she is running through the narrow passageways of the mine, her white nightdress whirling around her ankles. Michalik's torch casts deformed shadows on the walls as he runs after her. Like a phantom, Elena disappears in and out of Michalik's sight, and he is scared she will get lost in the tunnels. Abruptly, he wakes, drenched in sweat and tears stinging behind his heavy eyelids. His heart is pounding rapidly, and he tries not to wake anyone when he sneaks out to the kitchen area. By the large kitchen table, he finds Rudy snoring loudly, his flask tipped over on the table, a dark puddle seeping into the wooden boards. Michalik reaches for the flask and empties whatever is left down his throat. The liquid burns, but this time Michalik is prepared and savors the moment, finding a flickering peace in the crude heat from the vodka. Rudy stirs, his snoring shifting to sound like a growling dog, and when he sits up abruptly, Michalik drops the flask with a clang. Don't go to her. Rudy stares at Michalik with a frantic look. Michalik can't tell if Rudy's awake or talking in his sleep. Don't go to her, Rudy repeats, and slumps back down on the table. Who? Michalik asks without expecting an answer. The lady in the white dress. Rudy's strained breathing turns into snoring, and Michalik sits down on the bench bewildered, fragments of his perturbing dream coming back to him. The next day at meal break, Rudy offers Michalik another sip from his flask. Michalik greedily gulps it down. Hadzic, gobbling down fatty sausage, scoffs, pieces of meat and spit splattering on his already brown-stained shirt. Rudy, I tell you, old man, he will drink you under the table soon. Michalik picks up a chewed piece of sausage that has landed on his knee, squashing the red meat between his fingers. Was this what Elena's flesh looked like when flames were burning her skin? He takes another sip from the flask, trying to smother the screams he imagined his two daughters made when they realized they were trapped in a raging inferno. The walls seems like they're caving in on him, and he's urging to get out, up, away from this stifling dust, the smell of sweat from the men, the throaty laugh of Hadzic echoing in that narrow space. Without thinking, Michalik grabs Rudy's flask and takes off. Rudy yells after him, but Michalik is already too far to hear the warning. Whatever you do, don't follow her. The small hollow is cold and damp. Michalik isn't sure where he is, but he can hear something in the distance. Horses? He must be close to where they are excavating the salt and carrying it up on horseback to the surface. The empty flask lies by his worn boots, and its content has gone to his head quicker than he anticipated. A sense of relief washes over him, a numb feeling of nothingness. This is it, he thinks. This is what it feels to forget. The sound of horses' deep, fluttering breaths is getting closer, Too close for comfort, Michelik realizes. He stirs, not wanting to startle the crew. The light of their flaming torches are moving towards him in a discontented rhythm, making Michelik dizzy and disoriented. They shouldn't be coming from that end of the cave, he thinks. There's no opening and it's too small to fit a crew of miners, let alone horses with carts. As the light starts reaching Michelik's end of the hollow, he can make out figures. Their shadows, huge on the opposite wall, are playing a trick with what Michelik actually sees. These are no ordinary miners. These are miners from the deepest caves and the darkest times. Slowly, Michelik shrinks back into the darkness, careful not to be seen by the group of short but bulky and menacing gnomes marching past him. These are the creatures guarding the underground. Michelik has traveled too far. He has crossed the invisible border and entered an area where humans are no longer welcome. The stories he was told as a child but never believed are now in front of him, as real as his own flesh and blood. Sweat drips from his forehead and he closes his eyes, wishing for this terrifying moment to be an alcohol-induced nightmare. It's not until he can't hear the gnomes' steps nor their grunting breaths that he dares to crawl out from his hiding place. As he turns his head in the direction to the underground guardians disappeared, he gasps. A tall, lanky woman, holding a torch in her thin and dirty hand, stands with her back towards him. Her long hair reaching far down her filthy white dress. Slowly, she turns towards him. Her eyes, black like the hollow itself, pierces through him, and Michelik quivers with fear. Frozen in his spot, Michelik can't divert his gaze when the woman's blood-red mouth turns into a grotesque smile, baring her rotting teeth. Suddenly, the woman falls down into a heap and starts crying, her sobs growing louder and louder until she's wailing like a lonely wolf howling. Michelik rises and takes one step towards the woman, but suddenly stops himself, Rudy's warning echoing in his mind. This is the lady in the white dress. "Help me," she pleads. "I've lost my way." Elena's face flashes before his eyes. He needs to help her. Carefully, he steps towards the sobbing heap. When she looks up, he caresses her stained cheek, cold to his touch. Too cold for any living being. In her eyes, deep like a well, he sees his daughters reaching their thin arms up to him, and he lifts her up. Carrying her on his back, he starts walking through the tunnels, unsure where he is and if he ever will find his way out.
From the Ghost Next Door podcast. Should we take that again?
Yes.
This is Sally Hadzic
And Sara Mattsson.
from the Ghost Next Door.
You just heard the story of the White Lady at the Wieliczka Salt Mine in Poland.
We would like to welcome Krzysztof Windak, a guide and expert on history and legends of the Wieliczka Salt Mine. First of all, Chris, please tell us a little bit about the work at the mine that you do.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, Sarah. Good afternoon, Sally. I've been working for the salt mine for approximately 20 years, mostly giving tours for tourists from around the globe. My work concentrates on walking underneath the ground, showing people around, showing people this unique place. And this is really unique place indeed. We've been a salt mine, precisely since 1290, so since early Middle Ages.
Hmm.
And this company, this facility, are a working mine until today. This is also a very popular place to visit, and it is visited by nearly 2 million people every year. What means that in average we have got approximately 7,000 people daily. Sometimes it happens that even 10,000 people visit us in a one single day.
Wow.
It's got a long history, fascinating history, and we present approximately 1% of the entire mine to the tourists. So to give you the wider background about what we are talking about, the salt mine is located, of course, as the mine underneath the ground, underneath the town. It consists of over 2,500 chambers, and they are all linked by the tunnels and corridors, which total length is estimated to be around 250 kilometers. So this is like the distance between two major Polish cities, between Krakow and Warsaw. So if we decided to see everything or to walk through all the corridors, that would take us a couple of days probably. That's why we present the part of the mine, but the most valuable, most interesting one from a historical point of view.
Wow, so it sounds like you're trying to dig a hole through the center of the earth.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So this mine is one of the oldest mines in the world, is that right?
It is, definitely. I'm not sure if this is the oldest one, but definitely it's one of the oldest in the world and in Europe also.
Wow. And how did it start? How did someone decide to dig this mine?
Well, many things happen accidentally. In the past, we can say that salt production in this area started approximately 6,000 years ago. We know that people who lived here, who were settlers in this part of today's Poland, about 6,000 years ago, produced salt or gained salt from boiling the brine. So, using this very simple method of boiling the brine on the fireplaces, we would say today, produced salt. These brine springs stopped appearing on the surface around 11th century AD, and it was a reason at the time to start digging wells to find the brine underneath the ground. And accidentally, in one of the wells, instead of finding the brine, people of this area found the rock salt just a few meters underneath the ground. And they started mining in 1290. And since 1290 uh, until 1996, salt was, well, first mined and then extracted. Okay. But in 1996, we definitely stopped extracting salt from the salt mine because of several reasons. And at the same time, was a pivotal moment in the history of the mine because we started focusing mostly on showing this place to our guests from around the world. What we did successfully, because approximately nearly 2 million people visit this place a year from over 120 countries every single year.
Wow. So do you know what percentage of the world's salt supply this mine might supply? Is it, because you said it is still an active mine?
It's still an active mine, but we have to define what means to be the active mine in here. So we definitely do not mine salt anymore, and we do not extract salt from the mine. We still produce approximately 12 up to 15,000 tons of salt, but this is the salt which is gained from the process of evaporation of the brine, evaporation of water. The water is a serious problem for the mine. Saying briefly, mine must be dehydrated all the time, and it is dehydrated 24/7. In the facility we have got on the surface, we gain approximately 12 up to 15,000 tons annually of salt. So, but this is the margin production. So we do not focus on this. Working mine in our meaning means that we focus on maintaining the mine, maintain the chambers, maintain the corridors, maintain the whole mine. And we also make the mine smaller by refilling some chambers, refilling some corridors, making the size of the salt mine smaller, leaving the chambers, leaving the corridors, which are the most valuable from the historical point of view. And it means also that we focus on the tourism and on showing this place to our guests.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And, reading and looking at images from the salt mine, I'm so fascinated with all these different statues, and there's like cathedrals and all these beautiful things down in the mine. How did that come about?
Well, this is a very fascinating history. We cannot really tell when exactly it happened, but we suppose that it started being done around 16th century, and it is heavily related to the fact that our miners, people who worked underneath the ground and still who work underneath the ground, used to be and still are very faithful people, and they wanted to have sacred places underneath the ground in which they could pray. Places like chapels, places like the altars, where they used to pray before the work, sometimes after the work. Some of the chambers were built in the places where they are still now, but some of the others were so-called the roaming chapels or roaming altars, because they followed the footsteps of miners. So when the miners stopped working in one place of the mine to mine salt somewhere else, they usually took the chapel and they started the tradition of making sculptures, which we still continue even today. We got the bunch of miners artistically gifted who are still working for the salt mine, and even today their main job is to decorate the place and make fantastic and wonderful sculptures and bas reliefs in the mine and for the mine.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic. I love that there's artists engaged in beautifying the mine. What a lovely, lovely thought.
It is. You've mentioned about the cathedral. We call this place the chapel, which is the largest one. I think you meant the chapel dedicated to Saint Kinga, who is known as a patron saint of salt miners. Yes, definitely. This is, I think, one of the largest, if not the largest, chapel made completely out of salt, located underneath the ground. What means that everything what people see down there is fully made of salt, starting from the floor, going through all the bas reliefs and figures, ending on the main altar and chandeliers. They're all made of salt. And what is interesting, this is still a kind of active chapel, what means that at least a few times a year it is used for different kind of venues.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the chandelier, because that was something that stood out to me in the images, because they're so detailed and beautiful, and I'm glad to hear that they are also made of salt. That is astounding, actually.
They are made of salt, and what is interesting, they are made of the best quality kind of salt that can be found only in the one single place in the salt mine, place which is closed for the public because of the fact that there is very specific kind of climate and atmosphere and humidity. This atmosphere helps such crystals to grow naturally, but no one really is allowed to visit this place, just a few groups a year, because as we know, whenever the group of 20 or 25 people goes into the crystal cave, the place we call it, for 20-25 minutes, the whole atmosphere needs around 8 hours to recover. So that's why this place must be closed for the public, and whenever we want to come in, we need to have a special permit from the local authorities. And these crystals were taken from there, so those chandeliers are actually decorated by the crystals of the purest kind of salt, which is called halite.
Wow, that's fascinating. And yes, of course, I mean, it would melt, I suppose, if it got too humid in there from too many people.
It is, and we need to take care of this place. That's why our access to that place is limited. we try to present all our best things in the part of the mine which is dedicated for the tourists. So walking through the tourist route of the salt mine, they usually visit around 20 chambers where they can see some figures made of salt, where they can see some chapels, including the largest chapel or so-called cathedral named after a Saint King. And what is interesting more, on the third level of the salt mine, we have got also the facility which is called the sanatorium, because not many people know that staying in the salt mine is very beneficial for your health. Salt cures and salty environment they both cure lots of illnesses such as asthma, for instance. So whenever you get the problems with respiratory system, it's very good to go down to our sanatorium located on the third level, and by breathing the air, by doing some exercises, you can cure yourself, and it really really helps, because this air which is underneath the ground is bacteria free.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Oh, it sounds like it's a whole village underground.
Yes.
I would say like a little town, actually, like a little town underneath the real one.
So you mentioned that this mine has a very long history. So there's bound to be some legends and ghosts haunting the shafts.
Oh yes, definitely. The first legend we usually say to our guests is the legend about Princess Kinga and her ring. This legend describing and telling us how the salt deposit and the blocks of salt came here to Poland, and this story also describes the mysterious way it happened. We get also the story about dwarves. We got story about the White Lady. We got story also about the good spirit of the salt mine, who is considered to be the treasurer, the character who looks after the treasure, which is the salt mine.
So the treasurer, would he allow miners to take the salt, or was he more protecting it from the miners?
The treasurer is considered to be a good spirit of the salt mine. This figure is considered to be like a wise man, showing underneath the ground, wearing long clothes, wearing long beard, and having flameful eyes to some of them. Some of the others used to say that they didn't see him, but they heard some kind of noises that they couldn't explain. But it is also believed that treasurer is the spirit of the salt mine, warning miners about any particular danger that might happen to them. So whenever they hear the noises, whenever they hear something unusual, they should follow the noise, because the treasure is trying to protect them, and it's trying to show them the way to avoid any kind of danger or accident that might happen to them.
Would the miners pray to the treasurer or honor him in any way to get protection?
No, I don't think so. In the history of the mine, we know that the miners were very, and still are very faithful people. And faithful means that they believed in they were Christians and they believed in Christianity. So they do not pray to the treasurer himself. They rather treat him as a kind of good spirit of the mine, kind of protector of them. But only whenever you are underneath the ground. Treasure only is considered to be seen underneath the ground and never outside.
Interesting. It seems that Poland is a very rich country of legends. Would you say that these types of legends are still very much alive in that area? I mean, do people of Poland believe in spirits, and would they refer to them as supernatural phenomena?
Well, I think it's a kind of more like a part of culture than something people really believe in. So whenever you travel across Poland, you can meet many stories with some spirits, good spirits, bad spirits. But they are just the stories. They are just the local legends. They belong to this certain group of people living in a certain part of Poland. But they are not considered as ghosts or I don't know, something that might be impactful for your life. I mean, people do not treat them in this way. They are a lot more like part of tradition, part of the culture, which was developing over the centuries.
Have you ever had any supernatural experiences in the salt mine?
It's a very difficult question.
Oh.
Well, no, I cannot recall it right now at the moment. But whenever whenever I'm going down, I've got always something in my head that, people of Wieliczka, miners of Wieliczka, well, they used to, and still maybe some of them still believed in this some kind of supernatural thing. So maybe there is something in it. But, well, personally, to be honest, no, I don't remember something like this. No.
No,
Mm.
because we
No.
were thinking, you mentioned it's very deep and that you have close to 300 kilometers of tunnels and space down there. So you're really entering hidden spaces of the earth.
Yes, it is indeed. And what's more, for centuries, working in the mine was very, very dangerous indeed. And many people got injured, or even some of them died. And working in the mine, it is impossible to establish the real number of people who got injured or who died. But we know that, well, at least 10% of them, 10% of the crew over the centuries might have died or might have got injured. So that's why this factor explains why miners of Wieliczka created the kind of culture, why this culture developed over the years, over the centuries, why they simultaneously believed both in the Christianity and God, and also in supernatural things happening underneath the ground. They stayed underneath the ground during the daylight, and they had no daylight. Work was very dangerous, so maybe these two factors explain why it happened in this way.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because in previous episodes we have talked with paranormal experts and investigators, and they have shared that they believe one of the reasons why ghosts happen, or why spirits remain, is people with unfinished business, or who have died in traumatic experiences, like dying in a salt mine.
So it is believed that when miners died tragically during their shifts somewhere underneath the ground, and they were later not buried on the cemetery in the sacred ground, it is said that their souls were hidden in the crystals of salt.
That's so interesting. I don't think I've ever heard something quite like that.
People of Wieliczka believed in this, and miners believed in this. This is also kind of the culture, the cultural factor. But yes, indeed, it's still alive in our local tradition.
Mm. I wonder if that's connected to the older tradition of throwing salt at people's funerals.
Yeah, might be. Yes, yes.
Maybe.
That might be connected.
Indeed. The story that we shared for this episode was based on the legend of the White Lady. So what we read is that she and her dwarves, which was very fascinating, used to lure miners into the depths, and they basically got lost. Is that the legend that is kind of prevalent in the mine as well, or do you have another take on that legend?
Well, this is the legend related with the miners, well, let's call it world. The legend about the White Lady, who locally is called Wieliczka. It sounds like Wieliczka, the name of the salt mine, but she is considered also to be known as a Wieliczka. It's also the name in Polish language for the white color. So she is believed to be the daughter of the king of the sea, and you might be wondering why the king of the sea. What has got sea in common with the salt mine? So, well, we know from the history that the whole area we are here in Europe was occupied by the very salty sea during the Miocene period. And because the climate was changing over the thousands of years, the sea eventually evaporated, leaving the deposit of salt in this area, which was later gathered into one piece and covered by earth, saying briefly and basically. So approximately 40 million years ago, this sea, as I said, evaporated, and under the climate changes, the deposit left. Well, she's considered as an evil spirit who is hostile towards people and known for playing tricks on them. And miners often report hearing a female voice pleading for help. So when they follow this voice, they abandon usually their work and violate mining regulations. And the White Lady then transforms into the massive lamp of a white salt, collapsing upon these men and causing them to lose their lives.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show, Krzysztof. We had such a wonderful time talking to you and learning about the history of this place, and it's just absolutely incredible to us that you have so many visitors each year. We hope that continues.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sally, for having me. It was a huge pleasure to me being a part of your show.
Thank you for listening to The Ghost Next Door.
You can find us on YouTube and all your favorite podcast platforms. Please support us by subscribing and following us on social media at Ghost Next Door Podcast.